Mr. Harding has arrived. We are at full strength. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the February 5th, 2025 Finance Committee meeting. As required by Massachusetts General Law, I will read the notice since this is a hybrid meeting and this meeting will be recorded for purposes of making minute notes. This is to formally advise that as required by Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 30A, Sections 18 to 25, and pursuant to Chapter 20, an act of the Acts of 2021, an act relative to extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency, signed into law on June 16, 2021, as extended by Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, the Yarmouth Finance Committee will hold a public hearing on Wednesday, February 5th, 2005 at 6 p.m. in Conference Room A in Yarmouth Town Hall. The public is invited to, or is welcome to attend either in person or via the alternative access provided below. As is required, roll call votes will be required on every motion, starting with our quorum. So to establish the quorum, listen.
Aye.
Here.
Oh, here.
Yeah. Where is he? Mr. Perkins?
Here.
John?
Here.
Raphael?
Here.
Bob?
Here.
I am here as well. We have a 7-0 quorum. Moving on to public comment. I do see that Tom Nicanella is online, as is his usual thing. Tom, if you'd like to speak, please raise your hand. Otherwise, we'll thank you for attending tonight. Is there anybody else online who would like to make a public comment?
I don't have a public comment, but can you promote Amanda to a panelist, please?
I don't see her as an attendee.
It's probably that one that's Yarmouth.
Oh, Yarmouth Community Development, is
Yeah.
that what? It is?
Yep.
It could be, she could have been using that computer.
Okay.
'Cause they did it.
There she is. I hope. There she
Thank
is.
you.
Excellent.
Yes, I'm logged in from my Monday meeting on Zoom too. Sorry.
Zoom too. First order of business, since there was no public comment, I'll close public comment. The first, we do have a couple of transfer requests. They were not in your packet, but I have, Bob, if you could read, take a quick look at those.
Yes, I do.
There were two transfer requests, one related to the, let me get these so I can read them into the record. The first transfer request is in the amount of $40,509.21. It is for the purpose of funding the mobile PFAS treatment system. And it was the Special Revenue Fund, which is the Water Special Revenue Fund, did not cover the bidding services of our consultants' FRS administration process. But they have identified funds in the SRF, the Special Revenue Fund Facilities Improvement, which has a balance of $52,679.55. Lori, would you want to add anything? I mean, other than this is an internal transfer within the Special Revenue Fund?
Yeah, it came to be just because SRF decided to cover design of the treatment plant. So we put the whole design in, but we didn't know that bidding wouldn't be part of the design. So they don't cover the bidding. So it was just a little confusion with what SRF said that they would cover. So that's why that happened.
I'll move it.
So moved.
Second.
I have a second, so let me just make notes of that. Is there any additional questions or discussion? Hearing none, roll call vote to approve this transfer in the amount of $40,509.21. Alyssa?
Aye.
Nate?
Aye.
Mr. Perkins?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
Raphael?
Aye.
Bob?
Aye.
I am an aye as well. I will sign that one. Next up is a transfer request from the libraries related to the funds required to pay for the library boiler replacement. You may recall during Jane's presentation that the boiler failed spectacularly, requiring that the library be shut down for a period of time. It was replaced. The cost of that replacement was $28,554.83. There were two capital items that had not been expended to date. One was for the replacement of doors at the library. So these were previously funded at town meeting as part of the capital improvement plan. And then the other one is the $15,000 item for repairs of the library kitchen and workroom. Since they have not been expended for 3 years, and there's other things happening in the libraries at this point, Jane is respectfully requested that the monies required to replace the library boiler be funded from those two unexpended capital items. Is there any questions? Do I have a motion?
I'll move it.
Mr. Perkins?
I'll second.
Yeah. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none. Roll call vote.
I have a conflict of interest and I will recuse myself from this vote.
Thank you.
Aye.
Nate?
Aye.
George?
Aye.
Mr. Anderson?
Aye. Aye. Aye.
I am an aye as well. Carries 6-0 and 1 recusal. Thank you for the recusal reminder. That concludes our transfer request. Just give me a little second here to do a little bit of bookkeeping. Today is the 5th, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Next up is the always working Department of Public Works. They work all day and then they show up at meetings all night. Jeff Colby and his entire leadership team is online with us tonight. For those who like to double dip on meetings, he was in front of the select board last night. So the handouts and all that were part of that packet, so we didn't include them in ours if anybody needs those packet materials. But I'd like to again turn this over to Jeff. His packet materials, we already have those up, so we can share those with everybody.
Materials up and his presentation.
Oh, his
up.
presentation.
You guys have all the, you have your
Right,
packet
yeah.
materials.
Yeah, that's what I meant, the presentation.
Okay.
You want me to
Th-
bring the
thank you very much.
presentation, Jim?
Yes, please. For the record, I'm Jeff Colby, the Public Works Director. We also have Lori Rosala, our Water and Wastewater Superintendent, on the Zoom call. I'm sure she'll be able to answer any questions you have related to those budgets, as she already has tonight. We also have Amanda Lima. She's our town engineer, been involved in a number of the larger projects that we've done. And we also have Roby Whitehouse. She's our assistant DPW director. And many of the divisional budgets fall under her umbrella of responsibility. So that's really the team we have here.
Just give us 1 second here. So it's over there. that corner.
I could just say that we'll be giving the presentation that was the same as the one that the select board heard last night. There are 31 slides in there. I only briefed half of those to the select board last night, just covering the items that have changed, kind of the high level, if you will, but we certainly can go into the other divisional budgets that haven't changed for this FY26 cycle. or we can talk about any specific line items that you would like. But this is the first slide of the presentation. I like to start with the mission. This is also the standard format they gave us for the budget presentation. So you've probably seen this a similar format for other departments, I'm assuming. We maintain infrastructure and public facilities in a safe manner. And we do that efficiently with the resources that are generously provided to the department. And we try to do it with the best available technologies. Next slide. So I always like to highlight some of the past year's activities. And this year, we've had quite a few significant items happen. Both the water and wastewater contracts, which we call contract 2 and 3, are actively under construction. If you've traveled Route 28 anytime recently, you can see that. Contracts 1 and 4 have been awarded and are starting. Contract 1 is the treatment facility, and we actually had some earthwork start this week. So that's late breaking news. And this slide was prepared. It was just awarded, but they've actually started the work. Contract 4 is the work that is within the project limits of the Bass River Bridge project on Route 28. And we're doing the wastewater in advance of that project to get that out of the way and also meet some of the SRF timeframes. And that will be starting next week. So you'll see some work on that end of Route 28 starting next week by Robert B. Hour. The Parkers River Boardwalk Park is under construction. It's going very well. But that's been a highlight. That's a big project, one of the biggest park projects that I've been involved in and the town has undertaken. So that's moving right along. Higgins Crow Road Shared Use Path is nearing completion. That goes all the way from Buck Island Road to the Rotary, where a new bike trail will be intersecting very shortly. In fact, it's not one of the highlights on this slide here, but that project, we've had a pre-construction meeting with Lawrence Lynch for the bike trail project, and that is a state-administered project that will be going from Peter Homer Park all the way into Barnstable. So continuing the Cape Cod Rail Trail all the way through our community. It's a great thing that that's underway as well, but again, administered by the state, so I didn't highlight that specifically here. We've done over 13 miles of pavement maintenance. That's slightly down from some previous years where we did closer to 20 miles. That's primarily chip seal. But as we focus on other projects and expending money on, shared use paths and milling and paving, we have dropped down the amount of miles of road that we've chip sealed over the last year. The pump station rehab projects, which are, we say phase 3 here, but they were broken into 3 phases. Those were significant activities that were done to the pump stations that we have for drinking water wells and corrosion control facilities. That's substantially complete. I don't know if I shared any of the pictures with you all at any of the meetings that I was at, but in giving regular updates to the select board, there were some, pretty dramatic pictures showing decay and rot in trim and roofs needing to be replaced. There was also some confined space issues that have all been resolved, asbestos that's been completely resolved. So that project, which had to be broken into 3 phases because of the size, is essentially complete at this point. And then the big topic with pretty much all communities at this point is PFAS. And the treatment for wells 4 and 5 is functional and has been working well. And we're under design now for PFAS for wells 10 and 11. And we'll likely be expanding that to other locations as, either PFAS or other emerging contaminants is detected and needs to be treated. So we were in a position just a few years ago where the town of Yarmouth didn't treat any of our water. And now because of the DEP and EPA standards, federal standards, we're needing to do so. So we're in compliance and we are now in design for treatment at wells 10 and 11. And the state revolving fund list just came out within the last couple of weeks, and the Yarmouth project is #1 for funding for that well 10 and 11 project. For PFAS, yes. So the state recognizes that it's needed. One of the nice things about the SRF program, State Revolving Fund, not only does it give us low interest loans, typically 0%, but also there's debt forgiveness associated with that. And for the PFAS projects, there's additional debt forgiveness that's even greater than we've seen in the wastewater projects. And as you saw with one of your transfers and discussions earlier. There's even design that's sometimes covered with the PFAS projects for state revolving fund where it's not, design is not covered for wastewater. Next slide, please. So those are some of the highlights.
Sorry,
Happy-
can we,
Somebody want to,
Jeff,
Yes.
we're not seeing the slides on this side.
Oh,
We're
you're
seeing
not?
the
Oh,
first
okay.
slide.
Oh, no.
okay, well, you know the slides, you've got to
Yeah.
memorize, right?
Yeah.
I don't need to see
Yeah,
them,
but-
but, you know,
but-
for
but
George.
Are they seeing the first slide?
I don't know.
Yeah,
You seeing
like,
the first
it
slide?
didn't go into presentation mode. It's just showing like,
Oh.
I would just take it out of presentation mode.
How do you do that?
Escape.
Now can you see them?
And then-
Yeah.
We're good.
All right, we'll just do this then. Okay.
So just to give an idea for anybody that's maybe new to the to what the responsibilities of the Department of Public Works are, or just new to any of the committees, these are some of the things that DPW is involved in. The town has 17 major buildings that we maintain and 26 parks and beaches that are maintained, 7 active cemeteries. There's also private cemeteries out there that the town's not responsible for. There is also 240 miles of road that's maintained. And of course, this time of year, it's very important to talk about snow and ice. And that's been a regular maintenance activity that seems at this point has been going on almost every other night. There's been some kind of, treatment required. We've got some snow coming, I think tomorrow and then on Sunday. So it's just kind of, reoccurring. And those costs do add up, even if it's not a major event, there's still, time and materials that are used in order to deal with that. I also like to put up some statistics. I know your committee appreciates this as it relates to volumes. So for waste management, the MSW is the solid waste, the trash. That is down this past year, and that's a good news story that I like to tell, because if you look at the corresponding recycling data, that's up. So we're, as a community, throwing away less and recycling more. Those are all good things. So that's what's represented there. The construction and demolition is down about 9%. That's number is still almost double the tonnage of when I first started. So we're still way up. It's just down year over year, probably related to building activity generally. Then septage is an increase of 3%. So they're really right at their max at which they can process, but they're have brought in 3% more than last year. And then water pump, this is a number I like to show just because it has a lot of zeros behind it. It's nice to say that the amount that and this is associated with work that the water division staff is doing, but they pumped last year almost 1.5 billion gallons of water, and that is an increase year over year.
The capacity of what's our capacity limits, like 1.8.
Lori, do you happen to know what the capacity might be? It's more than this number, obviously. Probably not a lot more.
I don't really know it in terms of the year. We can pump about 12 million gallons a day if we needed to. But we didn't even get to 12 million gallons a day on any day in 2024.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next slide. So there's 3 divisional budgets that I wanted to highlight. I have slides prepared for each budget if you'd like to go through all of them. But there's only 3 divisional budgets in the DPW that have any changes in the expense line items. Any of the budgets that have wages have contractual wage adjustments. This particular one for septage doesn't have any wages. That's why it's 0. But the expenses for septage have increased slightly, mostly related to repair and maintenance. Could you go to the next slide, please? There's just summarizes what you're seeing there under expenses. Repair and maintenance costs increase, as well as contract operations costs. We've got Weston and Sampson that operates the facilities for us, and they have a yearly cost built into their 5-year contract for, essentially it's labor only cost, but their labor is going up as it is everywhere. And this year it's approximately 5% more than it was last year, but that's a component of the expense increases in the budget. And then, of course, utility costs. We've increased that slightly as well, just because both gas and electricity have been going up. We're seeing that in, the bills that come to your home, but the town is seeing that as well.
Didn't you just recently renegotiate that contract? Was that Warren
I
or Chandler?
believe we're in the 3rd year or FY 26 will be the third year. Is that right, Lori? For the Weston and Sampson contract?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, and that, is that Warner, Sampson?
Weston and Sampson.
Weston, yeah, excellent. Okay, good. Thanks.
So it's publicly procured
Yeah.
and so we opened it up and
They've been there for years,
and
right?
asked for additional response. Right. So it's about their third contract, I think,
Yeah.
that we've had them. They've done a good job and the
Yeah.
management's relatively stable because they've been with us from the beginning with them
Good.
anyway.
Yeah, Weston.
So the next budget that has some changes in the expense line item, again, there's wage adjustments, but those aren't for any additional staff. It's literally just contract wage increases. But the summary here is there's some adjustments to the insurance costs. We work closely with the finance department to calculate what those will be, and we put those in this budget. This is a special revenue budget, so it does have quite a few costs that might not be in some of the other budgets, but insurances are adjusted in this budget. But the big one, and the one I want to highlight, is the debt service. So we're starting to see that in the operating budget. Until the last couple of years, we weren't in a mode to borrow any money. We were paying for water projects with retained earnings, essentially cash on hand. But because of the number of projects that we are undertaking, we're needing to borrow for those, which is a relatively new thing within water. And so we'll start to see debt service within the operating budget. So it's relatively small this year, but it will be increasing in future years as we complete projects. So the projects that we've been borrowing for are the PFAS that we had just talked about. Both of those projects, both the one that's just completed and the one we're in design for, will need to be borrowed because of the size of those projects. The water mains along Route 28 that we are installing as part of the sewer project, that will also need to be borrowed as well. And then the,
6A.
well, 6A, when we get to that, will need to be borrowed. But then also the one that project I mentioned on one of the first slides was the rehab project for the pump stations. I think that's around $2 million. Of, we're able to pay quite a bit of that with retained earnings, but not all of it. So some of that will have to be borrowed as well. So we'll slowly see debt service increasing in future years.
You know,
The thing I do want to remind everybody about, and I'm sure you're well aware of, is the water revenues cover all of these costs.
do you know what
Anderson?
that debt is for 26?
Well,
Excuse me?
Do you know what that debt amount is for 26?
Yeah,
Um,
I think it's a separate line.
It is, yeah, it is. I can give you there's several things in that line item though. I don't have it actually broken down, but in 26, we have to start making principal payments on the PFAS. And it's the short-term interest costs on the water, $6 million in water, their estimates. So it's a 4% interest on the $6 million. It will be a short-term note. And then the pump stations, $2 million, and the principal payment for the PFAS.
So the debt service line item for FY 26 is $450,000.
Thanks, Joe.
thank you, John.
There was, and just as point of reference, there was none in 2024, 2025, 272,401. So we're, starting to see that climb and it will continue.
Was that the note that the ban that was issued back in October or something like that?
It was in April and it's
April.
due, so what we're gonna do in this April is we'll roll it over with the interest
Yeah.
being due in 26.
Back to you, sir.
All right, so that's water. I don't know if we want to pause at each one of these for any questions.
We'll come back. I think
Come
we'll
back,
do,
okay.
we'll do the whole McGill.
Okay, great. So the third one that I needed to highlight for you, because there's been some expense changes, is the parks budget. Those are primarily associated with the Parkers River Boardwalk Park, and the $43,500 increase in the expense line item for this relates to contract mowing for that event space, portable toilets for the off-season, and then tight tank pumping. The restrooms at that facility will ultimately be connected to the sewer, but it'll be a couple of years before we can allow connections, not just for that park, but any facility along Route 28. We expect that either late 2027, but probably more likely early 2028, sewer connections will start to be happening. And in that meantime, while the park is up and running, we'll need to have a tight tank that's pumped fairly regularly where the waste will go before we are able to make the final connection to the sewer.
And you say 42,000?
43,500. Next slide. So one of the things they've asked us to do is talk about some of the challenges that we have going forward. And there's, as we've kind of alluded to all along here, significant water and wastewater projects that are upcoming. So those are just challenges with regards to management and the borrowing associated with that and managing the costs and the projects. But that's going to continue, at least in the case of wastewater, for the next 40 years is what our plan is. And there's also limited options for disposing of that wastewater sludge. And as we build new facilities, we're going to have a byproduct, which is sludge that needs to be dealt with. We currently have a fair amount that comes out of the septic facility, but wastewater sludge will also be generated at our wastewater treatment facility, as it will be for every other town that's building these facilities. We have one location right now, and it's in New York to dispose of that sludge. And if that landfill decides to turn us away, as other landfills in New England have in the past, we have no options. We're out of options. So this is not something that's unique to Yarmouth. Every community is dealing with this. We'd like to continue to work with our neighbors as well as some contractors that are helping us explore options, because something's needed to help solve that problem. But that's a pretty significant challenge in the future that really has could potentially derail some of our efforts if we don't have an outlet for that.
If you, for the committee's benefit, if you do want to get more details on this, there was a detailed presentation that Jennifer and Jeff did related to anaerobic digesters. And also we do have a 218-page sludge extraordinary explanation that if you are interested in the details, I have the details.
So, the AD does look promising at some point in the future, but these are large facilities that take a lot of money to build and site. So that's more of a long-term solution. The septic facility generally has some challenges just with increasing maintenance costs. That's why the budget was increased slightly here that we just talked about. But also there's a large capital request coming up this year for what we're calling the EQ tank. It's an equalization tank. It's where they hold the septic before it goes into the treatment process. And that is deteriorating relatively quickly because of the corrosive environment and the way it interacts with the concrete. But that's just one example. There's been some significant facility maintenance, replacing of metal roofs and siding that we've recently done. And those types of maintenance is going to really be kicking in now that the facility is more than 30 years old. So there's just an increased maintenance that's needed there. So that's one of our challenges. Additional recreation facility operating costs. One of the select board goals is to expand the number of recreational facilities that the town of Yarmouth has. So when that happens, I need to identify that when you have additional facilities, there's going to be cost associated with those. We're seeing that in the parks budget this year, but as we bring other facilities online or as they're completed, there's going to be a need to maintain those. There's a cost associated with that. Some of that's unknown, but it's just one of the things I want to throw out there. Increasing costs with facility maintenance. I think that's one of the things we're seeing across the board. I think homeowners are saying that as well. But plumbers, electricians, they're more expensive. Just your regular elevator maintenance, even HVAC inspections. Nevertheless, when you have a boiler failure like the library, but just the maintenance of those and quarterly inspections, fire suppression system inspections, all those costs are going up pretty significantly. Primarily related to labor, I think, at this point, as we're seeing across the board. Also, increasing vehicle maintenance costs. That's just something to be aware of. I have some suggestions in a later slide on how we could potentially be dealing with that, but we're just seeing that it's more costly again, primarily labor, and mechanics are, very expensive when you send equipment out. We're just seeing increased costs. We just assisted the fire department in some pretty significant engine repair costs. I think it was $16,000 on an engine that needed to be repaired. A turbo went on one of their, fire engines. So just very expensive, cost to deal with. Next slide. So just these are recommendations to address some of those challenges, starting in next year, 27, not 26 that we're talking about today. We'll be looking at wastewater staffing in anticipation of the startup of our wastewater facility and receiving flows. So that's just something to look forward to next year. Again, not this year, but in a coming year. We're also recommending, because of some of the challenges in dealing with the DEP and some of the inspectional requirements at the sanitation facility, of filling the crew chief position. We do have a job description. It was anticipated that at some point we would need to fill that, and I think that's going to be a future need as well. So we're just identifying that. Creation of a sanitation enterprise fund is something that I've recommended for a couple of years. I think it would be a helpful tool in the sense that it would be similar to what we have for wastewater, for water. Water is a special revenue, but it's still separately managed and tracked, if you will. And we have for septic facilities. So those do seem to be helpful budgets, at least from a departmental standpoint. Also, in dealing with the increased maintenance costs, I think we should probably look at maybe taking some of that in-house. We did add a mechanic last year, or I should say 2 years ago, and that had worked out very well. We've been able to do more in-house maintenance, but that just brings us up to 3 mechanics at DPW. And when we were building the new facility, which this year it's going to be 4 years old, but the new DPW facility, we had a study done that if just to kind of anticipate and plan for the future, that as part of that design, what if we brought all of the vehicle maintenance in-house? How many mechanics will we need to support that? And the study said we need 8. So, we're at 3. If we, went up to another 1, we could maybe do half the fleet, that type of thing. So I think it's something to consider in the future to help control costs. And we do have a nice maintenance facility to support increased maintenance. With that said, there's also concern about the facility maintenance costs and the budgets associated with that needing to go up to reflect the increased costs. Also on the staff side, I think there's a need for an additional staff person at some point in the future. Again, it's not part of this FY26 budget, but just look towards recommendations on how to address some of those challenges. I think that having a building and grounds superintendent, which we used to have in the past, and we didn't fill that position, might be something to explore going forward. Next slide. I think that might be the last one. So oh no, my favorite slide.
Is your favorite slide?
So I like to highlight this because this is significant. And I know this is something that you're concerned about, thinking about, always aware of. And when you do a total, I won't go line by line, but when you do the total, it's approximately $14.7 million that the DPW brings in from our operations for revenue. So that significantly helps offset the costs and helps with some of the capital that we are doing. So those are all things that we want to highlight. The significant increase in the water revenues, that's not just a 5% increase in usage, but also some rate increases that were encountered this past year, which is why that one is higher than some of the others. The others are relatively small. One of the things that we know that we're going to need to do is address some of these revenues this spring. One of those is for beach parking. We're going to be making a request with the select board to increase the daily parking. That's something I know that has come up from this committee and something that we are going to be proposing to the select board, as well as water rates, because of the capital that will be undertaking and the additional debt that will be being brought on from previously approved projects. We know that we need to adjust the water rates. Exactly the amount is something we're still working through. We need to work closely with the finance director on what that looks like and what the right request will be. It's not too onerous on the consumers, but we know that we need to adjust the rates to deal with some of the projects. So those are the two that I wanted to highlight. We may also need to adjust some rates with septage because of some of the expenses, but we'll ensure to the extent we can that at least for the enterprise funds and special revenue that the rates reflect the operational costs, and that means adjustment. So that's, I think that's the last slide, right?
Yeah.
Unless you want to go through all the other 35 slides.
So I do have another, 15 or 16 slides for the other budgets, because we are asked to put those slides together by budget, by, category. But there are no expense changes on the traditional budgets.
And they're in the budget book, so if you have any questions.
Right. But happy to go through anything specifically or answer any questions you might have.
I just have a quick question on the water. So the water,
Anderson.
the revenue is 20 and I think the usage was 9. So is that just is that delta just price increases?
Yes.
From
Roughly is the difference. I mean,
yeah.
it's a little bit of apples and oranges, but the reason it's that different is because of the rate increase.
So as part of your request for rate change to run that waterworks.
Exactly. We haven't done that yet, but we do have a Waterworth software, and Lori could probably elaborate. We have a Waterworth software that will be modeled and determine exactly where the rates would be and what would be acceptable. You want to talk a little bit more about that, Lori, with the water rates?
Yeah, sure. It's Waterworth is the program, and I have a lot of the data in there, but I just want to make sure we go through it with Jennifer, because she wasn't here the last time we did a rate increase, so I want to make sure we're all on the same page on that, and I get all of the debt and everything. But yeah, it's a great program where you can put in all of the future projects, any debt, current expenditures, and it all goes in one place. We figure out how much money we need, and then there's another section to play with the rates, and that's where we adjusted the rates last time. We actually changed our block structure 2 years ago to have more blocks, so that, you know, the more water you use, the more money you pay, putting more of the onus on the high users. So we just need to go through that process again, and we'll be in front of you, the Board of Selectmen this spring.
The other one, I know Nate has always been very supportive of the increase in the beach sticker rate. Again, statistically, we do about 28,000 daily beach stickers. So if at $10 a difference, that's a significant amount of general fund revenue.
Right.
Other questions from, okay, we'll start with Raphael.
What are we looking at, Jeff, for the hauling and processing costs out of the transfer station? It's good news that, you know, that's a moneymaker. How's the cost for hauling and processing that stuff out of there?
Well, that goes up every year as well, and probably would be best to have Roby elaborate on that specifically. She probably has some good information on, you know, exactly what we're paying this year and kind of what, you know, the future looks like, but that's a contract that also escalates every year. Roby, do you want to elaborate on that C&D cost?
On the C&D cost, yes, it definitely is going to be increasing. We are currently, oh, you were talking C&D, I'm sorry, I thought you were talking MSW. So the C&D costs are currently...
Well, the MSW is going up as well. So
they were all going up, for sure.
Just at a different
Talking about both.
I guess
Yeah,
the simple question I'm asking is what we're charging, is that slope going to keep up with the slope of the cost increase that we're seeing? Because I've heard folks say in different towns, $95 per ton. I've heard a very big spread. So glad to hear what you folks are looking at.
We're going to need to adjust that at some point.
Right.
Whether this is the year or not is something we're still looking at. You know, part of that is how we're covering the cost. So C&D is very important component of the equation because that helps keep the disposal sticker low
right.
for all the residents. We really haven't adjusted that residential sticker in quite a few years, probably 8 years or something like that, because of the volume and the revenue that's been brought in because of C&D. So we're very sensitive to making sure we're covering the costs using that. So we need to look at that a little bit closer. But yeah, if it's not this year, it's going to be next year for an adjustment in the C&D fees. That question came up at the select board, or a version of that question came up at the select board last night. And at least one of the members of the board is concerned about raising the cost too high and driving the volume too low because of the increased cost. So it is a very sensitive dynamic. We do pay close attention to what our neighbors are charging for that. Harwich has a pretty significant C&D operation, as does a private vendor in Dennis. So we look closely at what they charge to make sure that we're not out of line, so that we don't drastically drop that volume, and therefore the revenue kind of dries up as well. So it's an involved analysis, but Roby, I'll let you provide some more detail.
Oh, absolutely. If we're talking about C&D, the current rate that we're paying is $152.15 per ton. We're charging $165.
Wow.
So that's for construction and demolition. We're currently being charged, and that's what we're being charged by Wind Waste. And we're being charged for MSW $90.04 per ton. And that includes the transportation fee by rail. And obviously, you know what the stickers are. So yeah, we definitely take those into consideration, and I'll be reaching out to Jennifer with those figures and the update on the contract as soon as that gets bid. We have a contract that will end on July 1st, June 31st this year, and we need to make sure for the construction demolition. So we do need to make sure that we have that number in as soon as possible if we determine that it needs to be increased, our fee needs to be increased. So all of those pieces of the puzzle have to come together, and just like the water department, we need to look at what debt we have and what outside expenses we have. We definitely have some capital items that we've been asking for at that facility.
Yes.
So
No, and that's why I asked, because it is an expensive business, and I mean, you're not gonna get pushback from me. We're a big fan of the operation. It's a great operation, and we get our annual stickers on both vehicles. So
me too.
I would encourage you to do the analysis and present a rate increase, because it's well worth it.
Justified.
Yeah, absolutely. Jeff, you mentioned that, excuse me, staffing and recruiting for the wastewater plant operations. Next year, that's gonna start?
We'll have to be looking at that in FY 27, right? Because the flows at the facility could be happening as soon as calendar year 27, more like calendar year 28. But we do want to have the staff in place prior to, we have to, I mean, DEP requires it, that we have it prior to flows starting to enter the facility. And, you know, they need to be familiar with the operations and fully trained on the pumps and the equipment and all of that before we're up and running. So
You know where I'm going with the question. Where are you gonna find these folks?
I have no idea. What I will say is there is a little bit of glimmer of hope is that when we did have the assistant wastewater superintendent position funded last year, we were able to get a great candidate. Ryan Chase is in that position now. He has the licenses that were required. But I'm not sure we're gonna find a lot of those people with the right licenses that are
Right.
gonna wanna, you know, stop what they're doing now and come work for the town of Yarmouth. You know, that's, every town is in the same situation. Water and wastewater licensed operators are slim and far between. And we're actually having to, and Lori can elaborate a little bit on this, we're actually having to, within the water operation, bring in completely unlicensed people, train them up and try to get them to get to the right license level with kind of in-house training. And to start up a wastewater facility, we can't do that. You've got to have people from day one with the right licenses.
Right.
Maybe in a long-term solution, you could be looking to kind of grow your own, but not right out of the gate. You need to have the people that are ready to go. So it's likely, we're gonna have to explore this a little bit more in the next year or so, but it's likely we'll have to contract that out, put some kind of, you know, bid together like we do for the septic facility. Weston and Sampson operates that. We know we can we can take the RFP off the shelf, dust it off and tailor it for the wastewater treatment. You know, kind of use the base of the septic RFP and, you know, alter it for wastewater and get that on the street pretty quickly. So, you know, that is an option to get operators. And I have had conversations with those, you know, private entities that provide those, the Veolias, the Whitewater, the Weston and Sampson, the Woodard and Currens. And they're all interested in responding to an RFP. So we know that's a very likely avenue because they'll be able to get people in here relatively quickly, whereas the town's probably unlikely to. I will say that my first preference would be to have, you know, municipally operated and staffed and licensed people, but it's unlikely we'd be able to find 6 people like that on day one.
So it's the trades in general, right? And these are not, these are techie folks now that have to be familiar with controls and automation software, you know.
Absolutely.
So if you answer the question, you're war gaming having this thing contracted out and one way or the other, either quickly augment if you can't find the folks, or start out as contracted operations and then maybe wean back as we do find people. So
Right.
that was, thank you. Anybody looking at at alternate uses for the sludge and grit out of the plant? Is there anything else we can use it for?
Well, just the AD, the anaerobic digester is an option for the sludge.
Yeah.
We are, you know, looking at different things. The really the concern is, and there used to be more alternative options in the past, but the issue is PFAS.
Right.
So because of the PFAS, they won't let us use it as fertilizer. They won't let us land apply it.
Yeah.
Even lined landfills in like New Hampshire and other places are saying, we're not taking it because of the PFAS. Well, you're a lined landfill. Why won't you take it? But, you know, there's just a lot of concern around PFAS these days. That's the big issue.
I'm gonna send you I'll send you the link to the real, because it's a fascinating what we're all up against.
Oh, I mean, coal mines are making a ton of money selling fly ash because every time, you know, a coal plant shuts down somewhere, the ones that are still in business are supplying the concrete industry. So, I mean, there's.
Mr. Perkins, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, Lori, I've got a simple question. This Waterworks software that you're talking about that you're going to use in the sort of proposed rate structure is the only parameter you have for adjusting potential rates volume used, or is there anything else you can easily use in that?
Well, we base our rates on the meter size. So you have that base fee that doesn't have to do with volume, and then you have the volume cost. So the program takes all of our actual usage for each customer and puts it in there so that we can get, you know, can see the impact on various customers as well as just overall, make sure that it kind of gives a better, because of the blocks, you get to kind of look at each. It helps to look at each customer that way.
No,
But it's just volume that's based on.
Could you use any other parameter? And is that possible? Or is that not a capability in the software? And I'm not, you know, it's a whole philosophical question. Do we want to just create a user fee, or maybe do we want to induce some sort of equity into the system? And that's where I'm going with this.
I think the equity that's kind of built into our current system is the block structure that Lori's talking about. It really is usage block. So if you use less, you're going to get a better rate.
No, I understand
for
that part.
Conservation purposes.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering, could we use something else? You know, can we have rates for, let's say, people with pink ears and people with green ears?
Well, you do run the issue of, you know, potentially discrimination. What we are using as a current model is the American Waterworks Association model that's used, you know, widely across the United States based upon meter size that Lori mentioned before. So it's a pretty common practice. If you got too creative, there might be some, you know, challenges about how you're applying it. We're open to any suggestions you might have, George, but I'm not sure.
Well, where I'm going with this is, you know, it took a long time in Massachusetts to move off a flat rate tax rate, but we've done that. And so this would be, is it possible to have user fees that recognize different income levels or different property value levels, or, you know, pink ears or green ears? I don't know.
Well, I guess to answer your question, the program can do whatever you want, but
you'd have to put the data
that's
in.
not I have not looked at anything like that. Our rates are based on water use.
Okay, and I'm not so sure politically that would be viable, but okay. I'm just curious if whether it's capable.
I say, the good news is that we have some very smart people who are thinking really hard about this, and they're going to be presenting this to the board this spring, correct?
Yeah, our rates usually kick in for July 1st, so we'll need to do this analysis and get ready for the next fiscal year, yes.
Good. Excellent, thank you, George. Are there other?
Yeah, a couple of quick questions.
Sure, Mr. Harding.
Jeff, going back to the park, the boardwalk park, so you'll be responsible, GPW will be responsible for maintaining the park
Yes.
itself. And you just gave us a number 42,000 for the.
In the budget increase this year is
Yeah.
43,500.
Have you put a budget together, what you think it's gonna cost to keep the park maintained in the future?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
And it's closer to $90,000. I think that Amanda might be able to comment on some of the more specifics because she's the project manager for the construction. She's also spent some time in looking at what the maintenance costs might be. And she put together a pretty good spreadsheet on what that is. And I can tell you it's pretty close to 90,000, but that takes into consideration things that aren't necessarily directly in the parks budget. Things like electricity usage or insurance costs, things like that, that maybe can be dealt with differently in other parts of the budget. So we try to do a kind of a full accounting when it comes to the costs. So it is more than what we're seeing the budget increase, but I think one of the philosophies with kind of the municipal budgeting, and Jennifer could comment on this as well, is let's just take incremental steps. We also won't have it online for the full fiscal year either. So let's make an adjustment this year, see if it's enough, and if not, adjust in future years, right?
Right.
Right.
Is there anything we can do to help
Sure.
offset those $90,000?
Absolutely.
Use of the park, I mean, is there any?
Absolutely. So we're looking into what that, it's got a very nice large event space. So
Yeah.
what the fees might be charged for that. And we have a precedent for that. When we had the Pirate Festival, or we've had some of the other festivals that even during COVID, it was, the drive-in, the movies they were
Yeah,
showing.
yeah.
There was all revenue that came in associated with that. That can help offset the operational costs,
Yeah,
as well as we're selling planks at the boardwalk too. So there are revenues that are coming in. You have one? Oh,
I have
good.
one.
So there are revenues that are coming in to help offset that.
The other question I had in terms of the sludge, can you make a guarantee in terms of how much sludge, or can't guarantee, but can you make a projection of how much sludge will come out of that facility that could be sold to an anaerobic digester as feedstock?
Well, we have a very good track record of the sludge that comes out of our septic facility. And it's a
Okay.
very large amount because of the type of waste it is. It's
Yep.
coming directly out of septic
Yep,
tanks, which is
yep.
a lot of sludge anyway. We find that with wastewater treatment facilities, it's percentage-wise, it's a very small amount. And we're also starting up. We have nothing now, so it'll take a little while to ramp up. So the sludge issue out of our wastewater treatment facility will be very low at first and then slowly ramp up. So
Okay.
the more significant sludge volumes for the foreseeable future are going to continue to be out of our septic facility.
I'm just saying, I'm a big proponent of anaerobic digester. I've been involved with a couple of raising capital for them. And the issue always, the challenge, you hit it on the head, the PFAS thing is serious now.
It's scaring a lot of
That was
people.
always part of your model. You could, because you knew you're gonna get so much for fertilizer. And, unfortunately, that's gone. But it really has to do with, a strong guarantee or something that the investors can look at and get comfortable with. And that's really the challenge, because God knows we need them, right? I mean, then you have to go to New York now, and I mean, the main facility shut down, which that's where you're going before, right? With,
We've gone to a number of different places with the
Yeah,
sludge,
Rhode Island.
Maine for quite a while.
yeah,
Land applied it first and then
Right.
into an AD for a small amount of time.
yeah,
And then landfill, and then a landfill in New Hampshire. And then when all those options closed to us, now we're into New York, Seneca
Yeah.
Falls, it's really
Yeah.
far.
yeah, it's
And that's
crazy.
why the cost is so
Yeah.
high. There's got to be better options
Yeah,
out there.
Yeah.
For the future.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Anderson.
So, for wastewater, how is our current timeline versus the original? How often does that change? Because I'm guessing it changes quite frequently. And then are there any effects of those changes on the budget for either 26 or moving forward based on hiring, debt service? Is that something that you guys are accounting for?
Right. Well, I'd say our schedule for finishing the first phase, which we're in construction now, is slid a little bit in recent years. I think there was an anticipation we'd be finished in 2026 at one point. Now I'm saying late 27, early 28, challenges with getting the project started. Construction just, takes a while. But we're on track now with the critical item being the treatment plant being under construction. We're feeling much better about the schedule now with that piece going. Even the collection system starting wasn't the critical path, if you will. It was the treatment facility, because we can't have people hooking up with nowhere to go. So now that has started and we've got a contract that's got a duration associated with it, that's been signed by a contractor, we're feeling very good about the schedule. And at this point, we anticipate that the collection system for all of the different contracts will be in place before that facility is done. That's almost a 3-year, 2.5-year construction period, 300 days. Does that answer all your
Yeah.
questions? Okay.
If there are no other general questions, perhaps we could take some time to dig through the specifics on the budget. This is not the only time that we're going to be talking about these budgets in particular. Again, remind everybody that our plan for next week is to start the conversation on what we are basically synthesizing what we have so far into the overall message that we're going to present, the recommendations that we're going to present at town meeting. So that is next week's calendar. So if everybody could turn to their tab related to Public Works. First up is facilities. Again, there are detail slides if you'd like to have Jeff go through the detail slides. Obviously, again, I think salaries everything is level funded. So there's 3 people now, 3 full-time people now. It's anticipated to be 3. The custodial services cover the entire town with the exception of specific departments.
There are some departments that have the custodial costs within their budgets, but we manage the overall contract.
Right.
And these are the costs that are associated with it come back to the DPW to pay for the services in the contract that other budgets don't support.
Right. So this is basically everything except those specific departments like golf and, the enterprise funds.
Right.
The library, if you recall, had its own custodial contract for those reasons, but this is everything. Any questions on facilities? I think the only related one is Bill Scott has sponsored a townwide facilities assessment, which is going to be used both for capital planning as well. From your sense, you've been part of that process, I'm assuming.
Yes, I think Bill's got a couple of studies in the works, but the one that we're specifically involved in has been the facilities analysis. And, Roby spearheaded that effort. If you want to talk about that, we can. But the bottom line is we have 5 facilities that they looked at very closely and came up with a report that we're currently reviewing. It hasn't been finalized yet, that identifies the capital needs at all 5 of those facilities. And the reason we targeted those 5 was because they're all of our aging town buildings. We didn't have them look at the DPW or, any of the newer buildings, just the ones that we're very concerned about. This one, the chamber building, the council, the senior center, as well as fire station 1 and 2.
1 and 2, right? 1 and 2. So in terms of when that draft will be available.
Well, there's a draft out now.
No, so for review.
But if you wanted to take a look at that, that should be available very soon. Yeah. We just had a meeting 2 weeks ago with the consultant that kind of gave us the overview of his work, and we had some things we wanted him to adjust in the overall report, but also kind of do an executive summary. And so we'll have that very soon.
The interesting, having spent a lot of time with schools, the same study has to be done for schools. So if there are any, unless there's other questions on facilities, administration and engineering, again, flat head count, right? 8 to 8.
Yes. Yep. No changes.
No changes. The fuel, the gas and oil, diesel fuel, and marina fuel, you've been providing, and thank you very much for providing the details behind that.
The usage, yes.
Yeah, the usage. Again, one of the things you start to see is obviously the big departments, police, fire. Interestingly, the trend on police was down in terms of cost because they're being more fuel efficient.
Yeah,
So-
they have hybrids they're using. Yeah.
Right, so
Yep.
all sorts of good stuff there. Any other specific questions? Hearing none, moving on to highways. Obviously, the, again, salaries, wait, the headcount's 15. We're proposing or would like to see that go up to, and it's 15 for next year. And for 2027, potentially add one more mechanic is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I think that would make sense. That's something we'll definitely be working with the finance director, town administrator to see what the right timing of stuff like that is. I know that there's been some other, they got to look at the big picture, but there's definitely a need for additional mechanic staff, and we can bring, again, more vehicles in-house if we had them, so.
Fire department specifically said that one of their limitations is in order to service fire equipment requires specific certifications. Is there any plan on that front?
We don't have anyone that has those certifications currently, or do we require them? I think if we were to add maintenance staff, we could look at that as part of that. Currently, with the 3 mechanics we have, they're, very stretched thin with the more traditional equipment that doesn't require certification. So I don't think that would be appropriate to add to their workload and therefore certifications. But, if we expand the force, that's definitely consideration.
But
Yes,
for those
Mr.
reasons, Jeff, and I didn't want to take up too much here in the room earlier. But for those reasons you just very clearly pointed out is why I'm not a fan of expanding the maintenance in-house. I think there's better options. And having worked in other organizations with large fleets with complex electromechanical, electrohydraulic equipment, I don't think it's realistic to staff up to 8 mechanics that have the certifications to work on all the gear that you've got under your purview. I think a service agreement, a fleet management agreement, so that those 3 or 4 mechanics that you have, sure, they can perform level 10, level 20 type stuff, but are more effectively used in managing those folks actually managing, say, Alltech, for example, when your hydraulics go out, or managing, Cummins, if you have to actually, send out for an entire, a machine for an entire engine replacement or rebuild, that type of thing. And, be happy to talk, in length, but I'm not saying it, I'm not telling you anything you don't know.
Right.
Getting 8 mechanics in the town of Yarmouth, master technicians, it gets back to the wastewater treatment plant. I mean, you're not going to find those folks unemployed.
Right. Well, fortunately, we've had very good success with the mechanics and even growing our own from, highway, working on some small, mowers and backpack blowers, and then kind of graduating up to, bigger pieces of equipment, trucks and things like that. So, we do have some success there, but I'm in no way suggesting that we maintain everything at the DPW, the full 8 mechanics. I think that it's going to be a balance of, what gets contracted out and what we do in-house. And I think the balance could still be shifted where we're doing more in-house, but I wouldn't suggest that we don't have a facility that could support 8 mechanics.
Exactly.
We have a beautiful, great facility. I'm very happy that the taxpayers and the committee supported that, but it certainly couldn't support 8 mechanics in the facility that we have. In fact, I get a little bit of pushback from our current maintenance staff saying, hey, be slow in adding people because, we want a bay and a half. So their rule is to have a bay and a half. So you have a vehicle you're working on, another one that maybe you've got in process that you're ordering parts for.
Yep.
So we're kind of looking at the big picture. We don't have or anticipate a facility where we'd be able to do everything.
You're getting sound advice then. If you get mechanics with that level of experience that know how to manage the whip, then you're in great shape.
I have a question.
Let's,
Your overtime, I know you have a separate for snow and ice, but your overtime seems low. Can you talk about that number? Do you have someone on call?
I'd like to see the overtime budget in highway grow beyond $5,000. As you can see, we've had to use that because of some staffing vacancies, and to be honest with you, $5,000 is not enough to get even any of the after hours calls that come in for even just, sweep up that glass on the side of the road, or, any kind of, emergency that might come up, a tree down, things like that. $5,000 doesn't cover that. So you'll continue to see that overexpended each year. The reason we've been able to afford doing that is because we've had some vacancies in the full-time staff. If we're at a point where we get to be fully staffed, that's going to be a challenge going forward. But yeah, you bring up a good point. $5,000 is not enough to cover the overtime associated with hiring.
Yeah, so that's where the transfer process, we're very fortunate to be able to use the transfer process to cover some of these gaps.
I had another question in your earlier presentation. You mentioned that there was a decrease in road maintenance in the chip sealing. Did you
Yes.
mean that you are looking at alternate ways of road maintenance, or just that you're decreasing the number of roads you're servicing or miles?
Right. Yeah, Amanda could probably elaborate on that a little bit. Our town engineer.
Hi, yes. So yeah, we usually try to, there's like a scoring system for the roadways that's between 0 and 100. And we usually try to maintain an 80 for that. And we've realized that we're able to get an extended life for the chip seal. So we've been repurposing the funds to provide additional like roadway improvements, such as replacing guardrails, because historically they hadn't been replaced. So we've inventoried all of them and have now been on a annual replacement for those to bring those into compliance. Because if the ones that get into a car accident and that there's a claim, we're able to follow that path to get that repaired. But the ones that either get a hit and run or just have deteriorated, we didn't really have a good inventory 3 years ago, and now we're on our 3rd year of doing that. And then there's been other projects that have gone on that are like capital projects, like inventorying our culverts and replacing those. So a couple years ago, we did the replacement of the Seagull roads, and there's a more detailed backup for the capital budget that goes through all of the different components.
Okay, great, thank you.
Unless there are other questions, snow and ice, again, that is our annual You Bet Your Life. But it's not, it doesn't impact the tax levy directly. You know, you do get, I believe correctly. I mean,
Well, we can overexpend legally because you never know how much you're gonna be spending every year, so we usually keep it, relatively low. And then if we have a year where we have to use those accounts, then we usually transfer money in. We also have the reserve as well.
Waste management, this was that long discussion about construction and demo and how we're going to be looking at the cost there, or the rates relative to our cost. You had referenced potentially the opportunity, or I'm assuming because we every year have this challenge to balance the C&D expense specifically versus the revenue. So we're always, it seems like every year we're at town meeting doing something with this. Is that the thought?
Yeah, article number 1 typically for the town meeting warrant has been to make adjustments in budgets, and C&D is one of those historically that we've had to do, maybe not every year, but pretty regularly. And it's really difficult to project. We do a projection, but it's really dependent on the volume that comes in. And as you saw in the presentation, there was a drop in volume. So the drop in volume will actually translate to a drop in expenses. So to really nail that down exactly what is the amount that should be in the budget is a challenge to do, particularly for a big, $2.5 million line item.
Yeah. So we'll have more conversation with that, I think, next week potentially, so we can, as opposed to, this is, again, focus on making sure we get through the FY26 budget today. Other questions? Parks, we again briefly talked about, we can see the increase in the professional and technical, which is your contract. And I think we've already talked about the revenue side of that, so I think we're good there. Cemetery. This is relatively modest one. The only thing that you and I have talked about separately is the zero turn versus some wider equipment, so that potentially redeploying that capital item. So the big question is, right now, what's your fleet of zero turns? Like 10?
Yeah, I don't think we have quite 10, but there's, there's some that we haven't fully retired, but typically Parks has 4, Cemetery has 2. So that would typically be what that looks like. And we are, evaluating that based upon what the work will look like going forward. So in the case of the Riverwalk Park, if we contract that out, we really won't need the large scale mowers because the contractor will have
Right.
those. We can really focus on the more detailed work around buildings or around,
Great.
graves and things like that. So we'll look at kind of, where that, falls as far as the type of work when we look to replace the next set of equipment.
Right. Any other questions related to cemeteries? Moving right along then to the enterprise funds. Initially, the first one is golf, and subject follows golf. And as we already talked about, this is third party, it's self-funded.
Correct.
Has some pretty nice, I believe, what's the surpluses on, are the retained earnings on this one? I mean, it's fairly substantial,
Yeah, I don't know what the balance.
Okay.
Close to 4 million.
close to $4 million. So,
Oh, it's
yep, 3 million one.
yeah,
3 million one.
as of June 30th.
So this has been a solid, no pun intended, a solid product. Questions about it? Wastewater, again, this is the first time that we've had expenses appropriated or recommended in terms of full-time salary. Professional technical, again, we have not spent a lot of money in the past. What's the outlook for this year and looking ahead?
Well, it looks like we'll have to spend more of that going forward. A little bit of a catch-all for consulting services. And the reason why I say, well, it looks like we'll need to spend a little bit more than we have in the past. In the past, it's typically been for water quality monitoring or sampling, things like that. But we have some challenges with regards to bringing the DEP and our groundwater discharge permit. That we got some money from town meeting to cover that. But if there is a need to get through to the next town meeting and can keep discussions open with DEP and productive, we may need to dip into this for some of those other needs. And again, in the SRF and wastewater worlds, design or planning is not included in those SRF programs. So this is a fund that would allow us to have the ability to do some of that work in advance of implementation.
And again, it's all, if it's not spent, it stays in the balances stay in the enterprise. So it's not like it doesn't have any impact on the general fund or the tax levy at this point. And last, unless there's other questions, would be water, the SRF, no, seawater. No, this is just water. I think unless we'll have any specific questions, I think Lori's outlined the program, and we're going to hear more apparently in the not too distant future. Any questions from the committee in terms of the specifics?
I'm just curious, the hookup started on Route 28 now in those properties. I think I saw it. Are they doing hookups now?
For water?
So for water,
Wastewater.
No, this is, yeah.
no, so for wastewater connections won't happen until late 2027 or early
So what are they
2028.
doing now?
So that we're replacing we're replacing water and installing wastewater all under the same
Right,
contracts. And so the water is a little bit different in the sense that we've got an active system.
Right.
So once they replace the main and it gets pressure tested and we're ready to connect people, we actually will go in and do water services. So they'll swap over the old service to the new service. There is a slight brief, I should say, disruption to that water service while they connect the new service. But that's just switching over from the old line to the new
I
line.
wasn't sure of anticipation you're setting, because I've seen what you're doing in front of like Skull Island. There was some work being done.
Right, well, there is a method to what they're doing out
Yeah.
there. They have to do the sewer main work, then they come back and do the sewer connections that aren't actually connected, what we call them sewer stubs. And then they come through and do the water, afterwards.
Yeah.
Typically, because it's a little bit higher in that, in that column, if you will. And then after the water's pressure tested and ready to be connected, then they come back and do services. So there is work that happens on multiple occasions, unfortunately. Just the nature of how that utility work works, that they're in front of businesses multiple times. And we've been trying to, work with the businesses. We know that there's a lot of concern about that because it's multiple impacts. You'd like to think that they're going to come through one time and be done,
Yeah.
but unfortunately, it's multiple visits. We've tried to be as transparent as we can with the businesses about that. I would tell you that Robert Biauer, as well as some of the water staff, have been very good in contacting and getting information out to the businesses about what the schedule looks like and how often that will be. But we know that we're now at the 1 year mark with some of these contracts, and there is some fatigue, I guess you could say, with that.
Construction fatigue.
But what I will say is on contracts 2 and 3 that I highlighted at the beginning of the presentation, we see the light at the end of the tunnel. Those will be wrapping up this spring on Route 28 anyway.
Headcount 8.
Yeah, that number's
That-
not right for water.
Yeah, I was gonna say that.
I think it's missing the 1 in front of the 8.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. So I think it's going to be flat for going into next year.
Yes, we're not proposing any new staff in water.
Okay. So unless there is a desire to, which I don't have a desire to, but any other questions from the committee on any of the details behind this? Hearing none. I think it's time to let the long-suffering, never stop working DPW get home.
One quick one.
No,
I'm sorry.
Mr.
So,
Gutierrez.
and I don't know, Jeff, if you're the one that's on the hook for this. How are we, I was looking through some of the meeting minutes for the project.
We're gonna cover that on next week.
We are,
Yeah, next week.
all right.
Can I just say
Yep.
one thing? I'll be happy to have a conversation with you and let you know how the change order process approval works. But going through meeting minutes that are in construction meetings at a finance committee level, it's really, I would be more than happy to talk about it on a big picture.
Yeah,
But
that's
to
it.
go
That's what-
through all the meeting minutes and then go through all the PCOs
No,
at
no,
at a finance committee meeting, it's just.
it's more,
It's not appropriate.
no, it's more the process, knowing
That's
the
all.
process, and what's the big number?
Yeah.
Where's the big, where is the total change order number
Yeah.
respective to
It's
the
all-
guardrails? That's
Yeah.
all.
I'll be more than happy to have you. a
But if we're gonna, if
conversation
it's
with
teed
all
up
of
for
you.
next week, we.
Yeah.
Good.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Despite what I know sometimes you don't hear it, but you guys are doing one heck of a great job. Trying to do all of that work. And it seems like sometimes we start talking about new projects. It seems like your plate
There's
is
always new projects.
pretty
yeah.
darn full.
I
So,
just want to say, I don't know anybody who's taking so much whatever, and he just sits there and he just goes along with it. So you're doing a terrific job.
Especially
Must be
in
that
the town
military
meetings.
training.
That's what
It's good army training, right? It's the army training, right?
Yeah.
So, just to confirm, you don't need us next week for the budget?
no,
Okay, all right.
no, we're good. We're
Okay.
going to, next week, we're going to start doing more of the synthesis around what we need to tell, the story that we need to tell to town meeting.
Great. I like to hear, I just saw it was a placeholder for public.
Yeah, yeah, no, that was a placeholder.
All right. Great.
Thank you, and
Thank you.
we'll look forward to seeing additional information.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Be safe, thank you.
Next up, discussion, possible provisional vote to recommend FY 26 fire expense budget. As we discussed last week, because of the need to potentially adjust out the expenses, which would be covered as part of the override. Jennifer and I talked earlier today. There's no urgency to vote on an amended, so we don't have to do this right tonight. So if the committee would like to, we could. But my thought is, we can defer this for a later meeting when, we're a little bit further along. Jennifer?
Just to let everyone know that what you'll see is you'll see a separate town meeting warrant article for the override, which will have the salaries of the 4 firefighters and what, Enrique went over. And so what I'll have to do is I will take that out of the budget and put it in a separate town meeting warrant article because the salaries are in the budget. So when the finance committee makes a recommendation, you'll make a recommendation on the town meeting warrant article, that's the override. And then you'll make a recommendation on the fire budget. And the reason why we do it that way is because if we kept it all in the budget contingent on an override, and the override doesn't pass, we have to go back to town meeting and revote the whole budget again. So we're just gonna do that separately for the fire.
Right. And rather than deal with that tonight, we'll deal with it when it's finalized. Is there any preference to deal with it tonight? Hearing none. Finance director update. Another person who doesn't sleep.
Yeah, I really don't have any updates, just been
Yeah, just,
busy moving the budget along.
yeah. Discussion and possible votes to approve prior meeting minutes. In your packet, you should have gotten the 9 pages of minutes. I did specifically, Mr. Anderson had requested some information about golf fees. And that had been, so I appended that. And would anybody like to make any changes? Otherwise,
I'll move it.
Mr. Anderson himself.
I'll second.
Melissa. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none. Roll call vote.
Aye.
Nate, George,
Aye.
John?
Aye.
Rafael?
Aye.
I'm an aye as well. Hey, I have to say that the fact that we got 2024 completely done and we're off to a good start. Thank you.
Good going.
Chair and committee updates. School budget is probably the biggest thing. I've been spending a lot of time on school budgets. So, I mentioned last week we had the meeting, the Tri-Town meeting. The final numbers actually were available. So the DY school district numbers came in just pretty much right where we had hoped that they would be. So there's no issue with the DY school district. We got preliminary numbers just today from Cape Cod Tech, and there's some good news there. So they are, looks like they might be slightly below where we had projected. So schools is not going to be, from our perspective, as much of an issue. The flip side is our partners in the district, the Dennis side, because of the changes in the wealth factor that drives a formula. They are looking at a $300,000 increase on their portion of the DY number and an even larger potential number for their portion of the Cape Cod Tech. So there's going to be some, again, additional conversations. I did attend the school committee meeting, and as a result of that meeting, we have gotten additional details, which I've passed along to Jennifer and others. I will send that along to you guys as well. So the big thing there is, in addition to, so we've opened a dialogue. So the chair of the finance committee in Dennis and myself are going to be meeting with Mark Smith and his new interim finance director starting on Monday to dig a little bit deeper. The importance of that is it is the first time in a very long time that those types of conversations ever been held. So I'm very encouraged. Don't necessarily expect a lot of change relative to their budgets, but at least it's a beginning. So next scheduled meeting is February 12th. You'll get the agenda pretty soon. There's basically, there'll be two parts of the session. One will be what I'll call the business part. Review and approval of DPW minutes if we have them. And then we would start working on the synthesis of our town meeting minutes. And I will send out some additional thoughts in advance of the meeting. If you have any, though, please feel free to send them to me. Again, George is our primary author. So I would refer everybody to what we had in last year's annual report, as well as the town, as well as the finance report that was on the website. So in advance, I'll send those links out as well, so that we all have a starting point to discuss. Are there other items from the committee that they would like to share? Hearing none, do I hear a motion?
I make a motion.
Oh, my goodness.
I'll second that.
But what's the motion?
Pretty obvious. Smart aleck.
We do require a
Motion.
call vote.
I,
Nate,
Aye.
George,
Aye.
John,
Aye.
Aye.
and I'm an I as well. You know, we have to stop meeting like this. We have to start doing like the select board does.
No,
No, we
I
don't.
don't want to talk to you about that for a while. You say, why is it that everybody has a meeting and that really nice selectmen's, and we're here?
You don't want to go, you
keep-
don't want to be there.
Let's keep it like.
Yeah, you don't want to
I
go
like
there.
these, I like their big chairs, you know? Well,
what's the subtext there? Is it a little contentious at times?
I'm
Oh,
gonna end the
yeah,
recording.
Oh,
We're
okay.
still recording it
Oh.
live, okay?
No, it's just,
Thanks, everyone. Have a good
Thank
night.
you.
Thank you.
good night. Goes to